Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city. And we start. Matt stood in front of the bedroom mirror, carefully tying a knot in his tie. His fingers moved slowly, almost mechanically, as if he was trying to stretch out this moment of silence before the inevitable noise of the party. Dusk was already gathering outside the window, and the soft light of street lamps penetrated through the curtains, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. He glanced at his reflection, slightly disheveled brown hair, tired blue eyes, light stubble that he never managed to shave. I should have taken a day off, a thought flashed through his mind, but he immediately brushed it aside. At the IT company where he worked, the last months were a complete rush new projects, deadlines, endless calls with the team in different time zones. Vacation seemed like something from another life. Muffled sounds could be heard from the living room. Kelly was moving something. It seemed she was looking for her purse. Matt heard her curse quietly, and the corner of his lips involuntarily twitched into a faint smile. He loved her little outbursts of irritation. They reminded him of how alive and real she was when they first started dating. But lately there have been too many such moments, and the smile quickly faded. He straightened his shirt collar and left the bedroom. Kelly stood by the sofa, head bowed over the phone. Her long brown hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her dress simple, dark blue, with a thin belt emphasized her slender figure. She looked beautiful, as always, but something in her posture, in the way she slouched, betrayed fatigue. Matt noticed how her fingers quickly moved across the screen as if she was answering a message, and then she abruptly turned off the phone and threw it into her purse. "Are you ready?" he asked, trying to make his voice sound calm, almost carefree. Kelly looked up, and for a second he thought he saw irritation flicker in her brown eyes. But she immediately smiled tightly, as if she remembered that she had to do this. "Yes, almost." "I'll just put on my shoes," she answered, heading towards the closet in the hallway. Matt nodded and walked over to the window, looking at the house across the street. There, at Trevor and Jessica's place, guests were already gathering. Light poured from all the windows, music some kind of cheerful pop with bass came even here, mixing with the roar of voices and laughter. Trevor, as usual, was the center of attention. Matt saw him standing on the porch, waving his arms, telling something to a group of people who laughed in response. His wide smile, snow-white teeth, and casually unbuttoned shirt made him look like the hero of some summer movie. Matt never understood how it was possible to be the life of the party so easily, but Trevor clearly managed it effortlessly. "Would you like to wear something brighter?" Kelly's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. He turned around. She was already standing in the doorway, wearing black low-heeled shoes, and looking at him with a slight squint. Matt looked down at his gray shirt and dark blue jeans. "I thought it was just a neighborhood party, not a gala," he said, trying to be funny. Kelly snorted, but there was no smile. "Trevor just likes it when everyone looks." "Well, festive," she shrugged and turned away, checking something in her purse. Matt felt a slight pang in his chest. Trevor, of course, Trevor. This guy knew how to turn even an ordinary evening into a show, and Kelly seemed to love it. Or at least I used to like it. He remembered how a couple of months ago she had returned from one of these neighborhood gatherings, her cheeks flushed, her eyes sparkling, and she excitedly told how Trevor had organized an impromptu cocktail competition. Then Matt just laughed, glad she was having fun. But now that he thought about it, other details came to mind. How she mentioned Trevor a little more often than necessary, how she laughed at his jokes that Matt considered stupid. He shook his head, driving away these thoughts. "You're just tired," he told himself. "We haven't gone out together for a long time," he said, almost unconsciously, as they walked to the front door. Kelly stopped, her hand on the doorknob. She turned around, and this time there was something soft, almost guilty, in her gaze. "Yes, you're right," she said quietly. "School completely exhausted me. These children. Sometimes it seems like they suck all the energy out of me." Matt nodded, feeling the tension between them ease slightly. He knew her job, teaching high school English was not easy. Constant checks of notebooks, parent-teacher meetings, attempts to interest teenagers in Shakespeare. He himself had seen more than once how she came home, fell on the sofa, and simply looked at the ceiling as if she had no strength left even to talk. "Maybe we can take a vacation," he suggested, "at least for the weekend. Let's go somewhere where there is no internet and neighbors with parties." Kelly smiled weakly, but her gaze slid back to the phone she was holding in her hand. "We'll see," she answered evasively. "Let's get through this evening first." She opened the door, and the cold March air rushed into the house, bringing with it the smell of dampness and distant smoke from someone's fireplace. Matt stepped behind her, closing the door, and they walked across the road in silence. Trevor and Jessica's house was already crowded. There were cars parked in the driveway, and music was coming from one of them. Someone had forgotten to turn off the radio. On the front lawn, lanterns hung from trees were burning, their light reflected in the puddles left after the morning rain. Matt noticed Jessica standing at the entrance, holding a tray of snacks and waving to everyone who approached. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a high ponytail, and her hot pink dress made her look like something out of a retro TV series. She was sweet, a little clumsy, and always trying to please everyone, the complete opposite of her husband. "Kelly, Matt, it's great that you came." Jessica literally jumped up to them, almost dropping the tray. "Come on in, we're already having fun." "Thank you, Jess," Kelly smiled, and this time the smile looked sincere. "How can I help?" "Oh, everything is under control." "Well, almost," Jessica laughed. "Trevor promised to do barbecue, but so far he's only telling stories about his trip to Mexico." Matt chuckled. He could imagine Trevor, glass in hand, surrounded by a crowd as the coals of the grill smoldered idle. He and Kelly walked into the house, and the noise of the party immediately overwhelmed them. The guests, mostly Trevor's neighbors and friends, were chatting, laughing, and some were dancing in the corner of the living room to loud music. The smell of fried meat and spices mixed with the aroma of wine and perfume. Trevor noticed them almost immediately. He stood at the kitchen island, pouring something bright orange into glasses, and his eyes lit up when he saw Kelly. "Here is our star couple," he announced loudly, spreading his arms. "Kelly, you just got fired today. Matt, brother, where's your holiday spirit? I should have worn a Hawaiian shirt." Matt forced a smile, but inside he felt a familiar irritation. Trevor was always like this, loud, too friendly, too close. He walked over to Kelly and hugged her, a little longer than Matt thought he should have. Kelly laughed and pulled away slightly, but her cheeks turned pink. "Trevor, as always, you're going too far," she said, but there was no real reproach in her voice. "That's my style, baby." He winked and turned to Matt. "What are you drinking, dude?" "I have a Mexican sunset cocktail here. I came up with it myself." "Beer, if you have it," Matt answered dryly. Trevor rolled his eyes theatrically. "Beer? Seriously? Okay, keep your boring beer." He took a bottle from the refrigerator and handed it to Matt. "But you don't know exactly what you're losing." Matt took the bottle, feeling the cold glass in his palm, and took a sip. He watched as Trevor immediately turned his attention to Kelly, whispering something in her ear, causing her to laugh again. Jessica approached them with a plate of canapés, and Trevor immediately put his arm around her waist, but his gaze remained fixed on Kelly. "Are you okay?" Matt asked quietly, leaning towards his wife when Trevor was distracted by other guests. Kelly looked at him, and for a second he thought she wanted to say something. But instead, she simply nodded. "Yes, everything is fine. I'm just tired." She turned to pick up the glass of cocktail Trevor had left on the table, and Matt felt the wall of silence grow between them again. He stood in the middle of the noisy crowd, clutching a bottle of beer, and thought about how long it had been since he and Kelly had really spoken. Not about bills, not about work, not about what to buy in the store, but about something important. And for some reason, it seemed to him that this evening with Trevor and Jessica would only make everything worse. Trevor and Jessica's living room was filled with the hum of voices, the clinking of glasses, and the rhythmic beat of music flowing from the speakers installed somewhere in the corner. The light from the colorful garlands that Trevor had apparently hung especially for the party reflected on the walls, creating a feeling of some strange festive chaos. On a long table by the window, bowls of chips, plates of cold cuts, and bottles of wine, beer, and something stronger were lined up. Outside the window, one could see a typical American suburb. Neatly trimmed lawns, identical two-story houses with white fences, parked pickup trucks. But inside the house, there was a completely different atmosphere, noisy, lively, almost theatrical. Matt stood against the wall, leaning his shoulder against the door frame, slowly sipping from a bottle of beer. The cold drink was pleasantly refreshing, but it didn't relieve the mounting tension he'd felt from the moment he and Kelly walked through the door. His gaze kept returning to his wife. Kelly was sitting on the couch, surrounded by several of her roommates, but her attention was clearly focused on Trevor. He stood nearby, leaning his elbow on the back of the sofa, and said something loudly, waving his arms. His voice covered the music, and each of his phrases ended with a burst of laughter from the listeners. Kelly was laughing too, louder than usual, her eyes sparkling and her cheeks flushed from the wine she was holding in her hand. And now, can you imagine, I'm standing in the middle of this Mexican village, covered in dust, and this guy with a donkey looks at me as if I owe him money. Trevor paused dramatically and then pointed his finger in the air. And I tell him, "Amigo, I only have tequila and bad Spanish." The guests burst into laughter, and Kelly threw back her head, laughing so hard she nearly spilled her wine. Matt noticed Trevor lean a little closer to her than necessary and whisper something in her ear. She laughed again, covering her mouth with her hand, and lightly pushed him on the shoulder. The gesture, so simple, almost innocent, made Matt squeeze the bottle a little tighter. He wasn't a jealous person, or at least he liked to think so. But lately, something about Kelly's behavior and the way Trevor was always around had started to rub off on him. He took another sip of beer and tried to distract himself by looking around the room. Jessica twirled among the guests like a little pink fairy, delivering trays of snacks and smiling at everyone who crossed her path. She looked genuinely happy, as if the party was her personal triumph. Matt caught her eye, and she immediately ran up to him, holding a plate of mini burgers. "Matt, you're not eating anything," she exclaimed, holding out the tray. "Try it, I made the sauce myself." Trevor said it was an explosion of flavor. Matt smiled, weakly but sincerely. Jessica was the kind of person you couldn't help but love, even if her naivety sometimes bordered on the comical. "Thank you, Jess." He took the burger and took a bite. "Tasty. Well done." She beamed as if he had given her a medal. "Is it true?" "Oh, I tried so hard." Trevor, of course, only got in the way. He kept trying to add some of his secret ingredient to the sauce, but I drove him away. She giggled and lowered her voice to a whisper. "It was just hot mustard, but he thinks he's a chef." Matt chuckled. Jessica always knew how to diffuse a situation without even knowing it. He nodded to her, and she fled to another group of guests, leaving him alone with his thoughts again. The music changed to something slower, and several couples began dancing in the middle of the living room, pushing the coffee table against the wall. Matt noticed Kelly finish her glass and reach for the bottle of wine on the table. Her movements were a little sharper than usual, and her smile was wider. She clearly drank more than she intended. Trevor was immediately there, snatching up the bottle before she could reach it. "Allow me, princess," he said with that signature grin of his, pouring wine into her glass. "You know, I'm the main bartender here." Kelly rolled her eyes, but didn't object. She took the glass and took a long sip, and Trevor remained standing next to her, crossing his arms over his chest and looking down at her. Matt felt something tighten inside him. He couldn't be sure what pissed him off more, the way Trevor called her princess or the way Kelly swallowed it like it was normal. He pushed off the wall and walked over to the sofa, trying to control himself. The tension between him and Kelly had been hanging in the air all evening, and he didn't want it to spill out here in front of everyone. "Maybe you should slow down with the wine," he said quietly, leaning towards her. Kelly looked at him, and something sharp flashed in her eyes, irritation mixed with challenge. "I'm fine, Matt," she replied, a little louder than necessary. It's just a party. Relax. Trevor chuckled, clearly sensing the awkwardness of the moment, and patted Matt on the shoulder. Come on, dude, let her have her fun. Life is short, and the wine is good. He winked at Kelly, and she laughed again, although the laugh came out somehow nervous. Matt sat up straighter, feeling the heat rise to his face. He didn't answer, just nodded and walked away to the window, where the air seemed a little fresher. Behind the glass, he could see a dark street, and he focused on this, trying to calm down. He didn't like the way Kelly changed in Trevor's presence. She became louder, brighter, almost alien. And he didn't like it even more that he himself couldn't understand why it bothered him so much. Maybe he's just tired. Maybe it's all his imagination. Meanwhile, the party was gaining momentum. Someone played an old Journey song, and several people started singing along, waving their arms. Jessica dragged a huge cake to the table, which she apparently baked herself three-tiered, with a crooked inscription, "Spring is calling, cream." The guests clapped, and she began to cut it, chirping happily about how long it took her to choose the recipe. Kelly stood up from the couch, swaying slightly, and headed towards the table with the cake. Trevor followed her like a shadow, continuing to say something in her ear. Matt saw her smile, nod, and her hand accidentally touch his elbow as she picked up a plate with a piece of cake. It was a small thing, a trifle, but for Matt this moment was the last straw. He put the empty bottle on the windowsill and walked up to them. "Kelly, maybe we should go home," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "It's already late." She turned around and her smile immediately faded. There was something strange in her gaze, a mixture of fatigue and stubbornness. "Matt, the evening has just begun," she said, drawing out her words slightly. "I want to stay." Trevor raised his hands as if in surrender, but there were sparks of amusement dancing in his eyes. "Hey, don't fight over me, guys. Kelly just knows how to have fun, and you, Matt, are too serious. Maybe I should pour you some wine, too." Matt ignored him, looking only at Kelly. "You drank a lot," he said quietly. "I'm just worried." Her face tensed, and she placed the plate of cake on the table a little harder than necessary. "I'm not a child, Matt. Stop controlling me." Her voice was sharp, and several people nearby fell silent, looking sideways at them. He felt the blood rush to his temples, but held back. This was not the scene he wanted to make. Not here, not now. "Okay," he said briefly and walked back to the window. Kelly looked after him, but didn't say anything. She picked up her glass and took another sip, and Trevor immediately filled the awkward pause with another joke, making the others laugh. Matt looked out the window, listening to the party continue without him, and felt out of place in this house, in this noise, in this life. The tension between him and Kelly, which he had tried to ignore for months, was now impossible to ignore, and something told him that this night would only add fuel to the fire. Matt stood at the window, looking out onto the dark street while the noise of the party boomed behind him. He tried to focus on something simple, the flickering lights, the silhouettes of trees swaying slightly in the wind to calm the irritation that was still pulsing in his chest from the conversation with Kelly. Her harsh words, "Stop controlling me," echoed in his head, and he felt them digging deeper into him than he would like to admit. He took a deep breath, trying to let it go, and turned back to the room. The living room was still full of life. Someone turned on louder music. Now it was some kind of retro rock, which made the walls shake slightly. Several people danced, laughing and tripping over each other, while others gathered in small groups, shouting over the tune. Jessica stood at the cake table, waving a knife and offering refills to anyone who passed by. Her pink dress was slightly stained with cream, but she didn't seem to notice, continuing to shine with her naive, infectious energy. Matt looked for Kelly. She was standing by the sofa just a couple of minutes ago, with a glass in her hand, and Trevor, always hovering next to her. But now she was not there. Trevor, too. He frowned, but immediately dismissed the thought. "Probably went to the bathroom or for more wine," he told himself, although a slight pang of anxiety had already begun to form somewhere in the back of his mind. To distract himself, he decided to approach a group of neighbors who were standing at the kitchen island, discussing something with animated gestures. Among them was Mark, a short, balding man with a loud voice who lived at the end of the street and always had an opinion on everything. "Matt, buddy, you finally decided to join the living." Mark slapped him on the shoulder, a little harder than necessary. "And then you stand at the window like some kind of ghost." Matt forced a smile and nodded, trying to join in the conversation. "I was just breathing fresh air," he said, although it was an obvious lie. The window wasn't even open. "Fresh air? Here?" Mark laughed, pointing to the crowded room. "There's only the smell of beer and Trevor's perfume. By the way, did you see how he got upset today? This guy is like a walking circus." The rest of the group, a woman in a bright green dress named Linda and her husband Paul, a silent guy with a thick mustache, nodded too, picking up the theme. "He was telling me about his trip to Mexico for probably the 5th time," Linda said, rolling her eyes. "I already know by heart how he bargained for the sombrero. And he was trying to sell me the idea of opening a tequila bar in the garage," Paul added, opening his mouth for the first time that evening. His voice was low and hoarse, as if he had just woken up. He said that this would be the new American dream. Matt chuckled, imagining Trevor behind the bar in his garage with his eternal grin and a cocktail in his hand. The conversation flowed on, jumping from neighbor gossip to discussing the new lawn mower that Mark had hired. Matt nodded, inserted rare remarks, but his thoughts were somewhere far away. He glanced at the sofa again. Kelly still hadn't returned. 15 minutes had passed, maybe more. He tried to remember the last time he had seen Trevor and realized that he had also disappeared from sight around the same time. "Are you okay, Matt?" Linda tilted her head, looking at him with slight concern. "You look like you've lost something." He blinked back to reality. "Yes, everything is fine," he answered, trying to sound convincing. "I was just thinking, I'll probably go get another beer." He walked away from the group, feeling their eyes following him for a couple of seconds before they returned to their conversation. The kitchen island was littered with empty bottles and glasses, but there were still a few cans of beer in the refrigerator. Matt took one, opened it with a quiet hiss, and took a sip, hoping the cold drink would help him collect his thoughts. He looked around the room again. Jessica was now dancing with some woman in the corner, laughing and almost dropping her glass. Kelly was nowhere to be seen. Trevor, too. His gaze fell on the glass door leading to the backyard. It was slightly open, and a slight draft moved the curtains. Maybe Kelly came out to get some air. She sometimes did this at home when she felt too stuffy or wanted to be alone. But for some reason, this thought did not calm me down. He put the jar on the table and headed towards the door, trying not to attract attention. Trevor and Jessica's backyard was small but cozy. A wooden terrace with garlands of light bulbs, several folding chairs, a small table with an ashtray where several cigarette butts were already lying. Behind the terrace there was a lawn surrounded by a low fence and then a dark strip of bushes and trees separating the yard from the neighboring plot. The light from the garlands only reached the edge of the terrace, leaving the rest in twilight. Matt stepped outside, and the cool night air hit him in the face, bringing with it the smell of damp grass and the faint scent of smoke. Someone had apparently smoked here recently. He listened. There was muffled music and laughter coming from inside the house, but it was quieter here outside. Only crickets chirped somewhere in the bushes, and the wind rustled the leaves. He took a couple of steps along the terrace, looking around. No one. Not Kelly, not Trevor, not any of the guests. His gaze fell on the chair at the table on the back hung a light jacket, which he recognized immediately. It was Kelly's jacket, the same one she had thrown over her dress when they walked here. So she was definitely here. But where is she now? Matt felt his heart beat a little faster. He walked to the edge of the terrace and looked out over the lawn. The darkness thickened closer to the bushes, and it was difficult to see anything. He was about to call Kelly when he heard a quiet sound, muffled laughter coming from somewhere to the right around the corner of the house. It was not a loud laugh, like Trevor's in the living room, but something softer, almost intimate. He froze, listening. The laughter was repeated, and now he was sure that it was Kelly's voice. And then Trevor's deep, familiar baritone voice, saying something Matt couldn't understand. He stepped from the terrace onto the grass, trying to move silently. His boots sank slightly into the soft ground, still damp from the morning rain. He walked around the corner of the house, where a narrow strip of land began between the wall and the fence, a place hidden from view from the terrace. It was dark there, but the light from the windows of the house fell in ragged spots, and in one of them he saw two figures. Kelly stood with her back against the wall, her hair slightly disheveled, and she still held a glass of wine in her hand, although it was almost empty. Trevor stood opposite her, too close, one hand leaning on the wall next to her head. He said something, leaning towards her, and Kelly smiled the same smile that Matt had not seen for a long time, soft and slightly sly. Matt stopped, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. He couldn't make out the words, but Trevor's tone was too warm, too personal. Kelly nodded, laughed quietly, and her hand went up to straighten her hair, but stopped midway, as if she had forgotten what she was going to do. Trevor leaned even closer, and for a second Matt thought he was going to kiss her. But instead he just whispered something, and Kelly laughed again, looking away. Matt clenched his fists, but didn't move. He didn't know what to do, come up, intervene, say something. Or is it all his imagination, running wild from fatigue and suspicions that he instilled in himself? He looked at them, feeling both superfluous and deceived, even though nothing concrete had happened yet. Maybe it's just flirting, just a joke, just Trevor being like this all the time. But why doesn't Kelly pull away then? Why was she laughing like she hadn't laughed with him in months? He took a step back, deciding to return to the house before he was noticed. But at that moment, the door to the terrace opened, and Jessica's voice cut through the silence. "Hey, does anyone want some more cake? I can bring you a refill." She walked outside, holding a plate in her hands, and her gaze fell on Matt. "Oh, Matt, you're here, and I'm looking for you. Where's Kelly? She promised to help me with the dishes." Matt froze, not knowing what to say. He glanced towards the corner of the house, but no more sound came from there. Either Kelly and Trevor heard Jessica and went silent, or they walked further into the darkness. "I don't know," he finally said, trying to keep his voice even. "She was here recently. Maybe she went to the bathroom." Jessica nodded, not noticing his tension. "Okay, I'll find her later. Let's go inside. Mark makes everyone sing karaoke. It's hilarious." She laughed and headed back into the house, leaving the door open. Matt stood there for a second, looking into the darkness around the corner. He wasn't sure what he had seen, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to know more. But something inside him had already begun to whisper that this night would change everything, and that the disappearance of Kelly and Trevor in the backyard was not just an accident. He turned and followed Jessica, feeling suspicion slowly squeezing his heart. He sat on the edge of the living room couch, clutching an empty can of beer that he never threw away. The karaoke that Jessica had mentioned had actually started, with Mark, slightly tipsy, bawling out "Sweet Home Alabama" and mixing up the words and rhythm while the others cheered him on with laughter and clapping. The atmosphere was noisy, almost suffocating, and Matt felt his patience thinning by the minute. After what he'd seen in the backyard, or thought he'd seen, it seemed unbearable to stay here. He wanted to go home, he wanted silence, he wanted to figure out what was going on between him and Kelly. But Kelly still wasn't there. He stood up, throwing the can on the table, and headed towards the glass door to the terrace. The cold air hit his face again as he stepped outside, but now it felt more like relief than shock. The terrace was empty, except for Kelly's jacket still hanging on the chair, swaying slightly in the wind. Matt walked to the edge and looked again into the darkness around the corner of the house. No one, no sound, no movement. Maybe they came back inside through another entrance, or did they go somewhere else? He shook his head, driving away the worst assumptions, and decided that it was time to call it a night. Returning to the living room, he made his way through the crowd to Jessica, who was now pouring lemonade into plastic cups, humming something under her breath. "Jess, I guess I'll go," he said, trying to shout over the music. "I'm kind of tired." She looked up at him, slightly surprised. "Already? Where's Kelly? Will you leave together?" Matt hesitated, not knowing how to explain. "She's still here somewhere." I'll go alone. She looks like she's having fun. Jessica nodded, although there was something akin to worry in her eyes. Okay, rest. Thanks for coming. She smiled her usual wide smile and was immediately distracted by Mark, who dropped the microphone, causing another burst of laughter. Matt turned to leave, feeling both relieved and depressed. He didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to drag Kelly home against her will that would only worsen their already strained relationship. But going home alone, leaving her here, with Trevor somewhere nearby, was like swallowing a handful of nails. He was already at the front door when it swung open and Kelly literally burst into the house. Her hair was more disheveled than before, the bun was almost falling apart, and a few strands were stuck to her cheeks. The dress was slightly wrinkled, and there was some kind of feverish gleam in the eyes. She stopped when she saw Matt and froze for a second, as if she hadn't expected to meet him there. Kelly, he stepped towards her, trying to catch her eye. Where have you been? She blinked, quickly looked away, and ran her hand through her hair, trying to straighten it. On the street, she answered briefly, her voice slightly hoarse. It became stuffy there, needed air. Matt looked at her, noticing how nervously she fiddled with the strap of her purse slung over her shoulder. Her cheeks were still pink, but now he couldn't tell if it was from the wine or something else. The smell of alcohol mixed with something else, a faint aroma of cigarette smoke, even though Kelly hadn't smoked in years. I'm going home, he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. Will you come with me? Kelly looked at him, and something flashed in her gaze: irritation, fatigue, or maybe guilt. She shook her head. No, I'll stay a little longer, she said, too quickly, as if she had prepared an answer in advance. Jessica asked for help with cleaning, and it's fun here. Matt felt his jaw tense. He wanted to ask where she really was, why she came back so disheveled, and where the hell Trevor was, who disappeared with her. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, he simply nodded. Fine. Don't stay too long, he said quietly and stepped towards the door. Matt, she called out to him when he had already taken the handle. He turned around, hoping for something, an explanation, an apology, at least some kind of hint. But she only smiled weakly. Good night. He didn't answer, just walked out, closing the door behind him. The cold of the March night hit him, and he took a deep breath, trying to push away the weight that was pressing on his chest. The walk across the street to their house took less than a minute, but each step seemed endless. He opened the door, turned on the hallway light, and threw the keys on the nightstand. The silence of the house fell over him, so sharp after the noise of the party that his ears almost rang. Matt walked into the living room without turning on any more lights and fell onto the couch. He sat in the semi-darkness, looking at the dark TV screen, which reflected faint reflections from the street lamp. Thoughts circled like flies around a lamp, and he couldn't stop them. Kelly is in the backyard with Trevor. Her laughter, her disheveled appearance, her evasive answers. He tried to convince himself that it didn't mean anything, just a party, just wine, just Trevor, always interfering where he wasn't asked to. But the more he thought about it, the less he believed in his own excuses. An hour passed, maybe more. He did not look at his watch, but the silence in the house became thicker, almost palpable. Finally, he heard the sound of footsteps on the porch, the click of the lock, and the door opened. Kelly walked in, quietly closing the door behind her. She didn't turn on the light, apparently thinking he was already asleep. Matt sat motionless, watching her take off her shoes, swaying slightly and throwing her purse on the floor. Her movements were fast, nervous, as if she wanted to end this evening as quickly as possible. You're home, he said, and his voice sounded louder than he expected in this silence. Kelly started, turned around, and looked at him. In the twilight, her face seemed paler than usual, and her eyes darker. Yes, I just got back, she answered, looking away. Tired. I'll go to bed. How was the party? He asked without getting up from the sofa. His tone wasn't accusing, but something about it made her tense. It's okay, she said briefly. Jessica tired everyone out with her cake, and Mark sang until he was hoarse. Nothing new. She headed for the stairs, but Matt couldn't resist. And Trevor? He asked, and his name hung in the air like a stone thrown into water. Kelly stopped without turning around. Her shoulders lifted slightly, as if she had taken a deep breath. What Trevor? Her voice was even, but too strained. He was there, as always. He joked and made everyone laugh. You know him. Yes, I know, Matt said quietly, but she didn't wait for him to continue. She quickly walked up the stairs, and a minute later he heard the bedroom door slam. He remained sitting in the dark, feeling the silence grow even heavier. Kelly went to bed without even trying to talk, without asking why he left, without explaining what was happening. Her evasiveness, her nervousness, her quick departure, all this formed a mosaic that he did not want to complete. He leaned back on the sofa, closed his eyes, and tried to turn off his thoughts, but they continued to spin like a broken record. Something was wrong. Something has changed, and he was afraid that he would soon find out exactly what. Morning burst into the house quietly, almost imperceptibly. Thin strips of gray light filtered through the cracks in the curtains, illuminating the living room where Matt sat all night. He didn't sleep. He couldn't bring himself to go up to the bedroom, lie down next to Kelly, and pretend that everything was fine. Instead, he remained on the couch, staring at the ceiling as the darkness slowly gave way to the pale March dawn. His thoughts swirled in an endless whirlpool. Kelly in the backyard, her disheveled appearance, evasive answers, the smell of smoke on her clothes. He tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that it was all just fatigue and paranoia. But deep down he knew that the truth was already knocking on the door. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made him straighten up. Kelly came downstairs, barefoot, wearing an old t-shirt and gray sweatpants. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail. Her face was pale, with light shadows under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't gotten much sleep either, although he could hear her tossing and turning in bed half the night. She held a mug of water in her hands, which she immediately put on the kitchen table without looking at him. "Good morning," she said quietly, almost in a whisper, as if she was afraid to break the fragile silence. Matt nodded without answering. He looked at her, waiting for her to say something else. But she was silent, just stood at the table, fiddling with the hem of her t-shirt. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. "You came back late yesterday," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Everything is fine." Kelly looked up at him, and something flashed in her eyes: fear, guilt, indecision. She swallowed before answering. "Yes, okay," she began, but then fell silent, as if the words were stuck in her throat. She looked away, looked at the mug, then back at him. No, not really. Matt felt his heart clench. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want his suspicions to be confirmed, but at the same time, he needed to know. He sat up straight on the sofa, placing his hands on his knees. "What happened, Kelly?" he asked, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to remain calm. She took a step towards him, then stopped. Her hands clenched nervously into fists and then relaxed. She took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "I overdid it with wine yesterday," she began, looking somewhere at the floor. "You were right, I drank too much. And I accidentally went too far. With Trevor." Matt froze. The word Trevor hit him like a slap in the face, but he forced himself to remain silent, waiting for the continuation. Kelly looked up, tears now shining in her eyes. "It was a mistake, Matt," she said quickly, as if she was in a hurry to get it all out. "We were just chatting in the backyard, laughing, and then he kissed me. And I didn't stop him right away. He touched me on the chest, on the waist, but I stopped him, I swear. It lasted seconds, no more. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing. It doesn't mean anything." Each word fell on him like a heavy stone, crushing the remnants of hope that he tried to maintain. He imagined it Trevor leaning toward her, his hands on her body, her laugh turning into something more. His stomach clenched and his throat went dry, but he didn't scream, didn't jump, didn't do anything he wanted. Instead, he nodded slowly, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You allowed him to kiss you," he repeated quietly, almost in a whisper, as if checking if he had understood correctly. Kelly shuddered, stepped closer, and knelt down in front of the sofa, trying to catch his eye. It wasn't a permission, Matt, she said, her voice shaking. I was out of my mind. The wine went to my head, he was there, and everything happened so quickly. I didn't mean it, I swear to you. I stopped him as soon as I realized what was happening. Matt looked down at her eyes wet with tears, at her trembling lips, and felt two feelings fighting inside him: rage and some strange, painful emptiness. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that it really was a mistake, that the alcohol had clouded her judgment, that she had no intention of betraying him. But the image of Trevor, his grin, his hands on Kelly, did not leave my head. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked, his voice becoming a little louder, although he was still holding back. "You were there with him, alone, behind the house. You could have just come back to me." Kelly pressed her lips together as if searching for words. "I don't know," she finally admitted. I had fun, I guess." He was joking, saying something, and I just lost control. It's not an excuse, I know, but I didn't want it to go that far. It was stupid, Matt. Please believe me. He was silent, looking at her. His hands were on his knees, clenched into fists, but he didn't even notice it. Shock still held him in its grip, preventing his feelings from breaking out. He imagined himself yelling at her, asking her how she could, demanding details, but instead he just sat there, trying to comprehend what she had said. "You kissed him," he finally said, and it sounded not like a question, but like a statement. "And he touched you. And I was there, in the house, waiting for you." Kelly covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders shook. She cried, quietly but desperately, and Matt felt his own eyes sting. He hated it, he hated her tears, he hated his helplessness, he hated that he didn't know how to react. "Forgive me," she whispered through her fingers. "I didn't want to hurt you. It doesn't mean anything, Matt. It was just a moment, a stupid, drunken moment. I love you." Those words, "I love you," were usually an anchor for him, something that kept them together even in the most difficult times. But now they sounded empty, like echoes in an empty room. He wanted to believe her, wanted to hug her, tell her that everything would be okay. But instead, he only felt cold. "I need time," he finally said, getting up from the sofa. His voice was smooth, almost mechanical. "I don't know what to think, Kelly. Just give me time." She looked up at him, still sitting on the floor, and nodded, wiping her tears with her sleeve. "Okay," she whispered. "As many as you like. I will do everything to fix this." Matt didn't answer. He walked past her into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and drank it in one gulp, feeling how the cold liquid calmed the storm inside a little. Kelly remained in the living room, sobbing quietly, but he didn't turn around. He couldn't look at her now, not because he hated her, but because he was afraid that he would see something in her face that would make this truth even more real. He placed the glass in the sink and leaned against the countertop, looking out the window. The morning was cloudy, gray, like his thoughts. He didn't know what to do next: forgive her, as she asked, or let these suspicions and pain grow. But he knew one thing for sure. This morning's truth changed everything, and he wasn't sure if they could go back. The night stretched on endlessly, like a shadow that could not be driven away. Matt lay on the living room couch, staring at the ceiling, where the faint light from the street lamp cast blurry patterns through the curtains. He didn't go to the bedroom. He couldn't bring himself to lie next to Kelly after that morning, after her words that now sounded like a broken record in his head. "I overdid it with wine. It was a mistake. He kissed me. I stopped him." Each sentence was like a blow, and he didn't know what hurt more: the truth itself, or how easily she dumped it on him, as if it were a trifle that could be erased with an eraser. He turned on his side, putting his hand under his head, and closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead, that evening played over and over before my eyes: the party, the noise, the laughter, Trevor with his stupid grin, Kelly disappearing around the corner of the house. He saw her disheveled hair, her nervous smile when she returned, and heard her evasive answers. And now, knowing what happened, he couldn't stop the movie in his head. Trevor leaning towards her, his hand on her breast, her lips not immediately moving away. It was like poison slowly spreading through his veins, and he didn't know how to get it out. Is this a coincidence? He asked himself, and the question echoed in the void. Kelly said she was drunk and didn't realize it didn't mean anything. And part of him wanted to believe the part that remembered their early years, their wedding, their quiet evenings watching old films. She had never given him a reason to doubt her before. She was friendly, open, but not the type to overstep boundaries. Or did he just not notice it? Maybe he trusted too much, was too used to the fact that she was always there, that their life was something stable, indestructible. But the other part, the one that did not sleep at night, that clenched its fists at the thought of Trevor, whispered that this was not an accident. She didn't just drink too much and stumble. She went into the backyard with him, stayed there, laughed with him, let him get closer. It was a choice, even if small, even if clouded by wine. And this choice now stood between them like a wall that he did not know how to dismantle. He remembered how she looked that night, flushed, alive, almost alien. He hadn't seen her like this for a long time. With him, she was tired, irritated, distant. But with Trevor, it's different. Maybe this is true. Maybe she was tired of him, of their routine, of his calmness that she once loved. Matt sat up and ran his hands over his face, feeling the stubble under his fingers. The silence of the house was oppressive, and he almost wished he had turned on the TV to drown out the noise in his head. He got up, went to the kitchen, poured water, but didn't drink. He just stood there, looking out the dark window. The reflection looked back at him, a tired man with sunken eyes, a tense jaw. Who am I to her now, he thought. The husband she claims to love? Or just a habit she doesn't want to let go of? He remembered their conversation in the morning. Her tears, her "I'm sorry," her assurances that it didn't mean anything. But if it didn't mean anything, why didn't she say it right away? Why did you return home and go to bed as if nothing had happened? He went over every detail, the way she avoided his gaze, the way she fiddled with her t-shirt, the way her voice trembled. It was guilt, yes, but something else. Fear, shame, or relief that she finally confessed. He didn't know, and it was killing him. Not knowing was worse than knowing. Matt returned to the couch and lay down, pulling the thin blanket up to his chin. The coldness between him and Kelly grew with each passing hour. In the morning, she tried to talk to him, asked if he wanted coffee, offered to cook breakfast. But he answered briefly, almost rudely, "No need." She fell silent, went into the bedroom, and since then they have hardly crossed paths. He felt this distance like a physical abyss, and did not know whether he wanted to close it. He needed time, he told her that, but time only increased his confusion. Forgive her. How? To forget that she kissed someone else, that she allowed him to touch her. Or leave. But where? This is their home, their life, their 10 years together. He thought about Trevor, his confidence, his charisma, his ability to fill any room. Matt was never like this. He was quiet, reserved, and reliable. Kelly always said that she loved him for this, that he was her anchor. But now he doubted, what if she was lying? What if she wanted someone like Trevor, loud, bright, lively? He hated himself for these thoughts, for making comparisons, but he couldn't stop. Maybe she didn't want to kiss it, but something brought her there. Something he didn't give her. As the night wore on, Matt felt exhaustion finally creeping up on him, but bringing no relief. He closed his eyes, and Kelly appeared in front of him again, not the one who had cried in the morning, but the one who had laughed with Trevor in the backyard. This image was like a knife, and he did not know how to pull it out. Accident or not, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that he no longer trusts her as much as he used to. And this cold, this ice barrier between them, it will not melt on its own. He had to decide what to do, but for now he just lay there, lost in his pain and confusion, waiting for the morning to bring some sort of answer. The day dragged on slowly, as if time had decided to punish Matt for his sleepless nights. He woke up on the sofa when the sun was already high, filling the living room with pale light. His body ached from the uncomfortable position, and his head was buzzing from endless thoughts that did not let him go for a minute. He had heard Kelly earlier. She came downstairs around 8, quietly clanking the dishes in the kitchen, but did not come up to him. This silence between them became almost tangible, like a thick fog that could not be dispersed. He stood up, stretched his neck, and headed to the bathroom, avoiding her. He needed space, at least for the morning. By midday, he was sitting at his laptop in the small home office, the room he and Kelly had once furnished together with bookshelves and an old desk he'd found at a flea market. Now this was his refuge. He tried to concentrate on his work letters, but the lines blurred before his eyes. Her thoughts returned again to that evening, to her confession to Trevor. He closed the laptop with a quiet click and leaned back in his chair, looking at the ceiling. The silence of the house was interrupted only by occasional sounds: Kelly's steps upstairs, the creaking of floorboards, the faint hum of the refrigerator. They lived under the same roof, but as if in different worlds. Towards evening, he heard her coming down the stairs. Matt tensed, not knowing what to expect. The last few days they hardly spoke, short yes and no, polite but cold phrases, as if between strangers. He was not ready for more, did not know how to cross this abyss that she herself had dug. But when Kelly appeared at the office door, he noticed something new in her: uncertainty mixed with determination. She looked better than in the morning. Her hair was pulled back neatly into a low ponytail, and she was wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans, nothing fancy. But this was the Kelly he'd known for years, with no sign of the disheveled, nervous woman from the party. She was holding the phone in her hands, but immediately put it on the shelf by the door, as if she didn't want it to be a distraction. "Matt," she began quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "Can we talk?" He looked at her without changing his position. His face remained impenetrable, although everything inside was clenched. He nodded briefly, almost imperceptibly. "Of course," he said, and his voice sounded drier than he intended. Kelly took a step inside, crossing her arms defensively. "I know you're angry," she said, looking somewhere to the side, "and I deserve it. But I don't want us to live like this. It's like we don't exist anymore." Matt was silent, waiting for her to say next. Her words touched him, as if we weren't there anymore, because that's exactly how he felt. But he wasn't ready to admit it out loud. "I thought," she continued, her voice becoming a little firmer, "maybe we should try starting over. Don't pretend that nothing happened, but try to fix it. I want to invite you to dinner. Today, just the two of us." He raised his eyebrows, not expecting such a turn. Dinner? It was so simple, so banal, and at the same time so inappropriate after all. He looked at her, trying to understand what was behind this proposal: a sincere desire, or just an attempt to make amends. "Dinner?" he asked, and a note of distrust slipped into his tone. Kelly nodded, stepping closer. Her arms fell along her body, and she finally looked into his eyes. "Yes, nothing complicated. I'll cook something, or we can order it, whatever you want. Let's just sit, eat, and talk. I don't want you to withdraw into yourself, Matt, and I don't want you to think that I don't care." He looked away, feeling the contradictions fighting inside him. Part of him wanted to agree to sit at the table as before, to hear her voice, not poisoned by tears or excuses. He missed her, the Kelly who was his best friend, his rock. But the other part, the part that still saw Trevor leaning toward her, resisted. How could he sit across from her, eat the food she prepared, and not think about the fact that her lips were on someone else, that her body, which he knew better than his own, was in the wrong hands? "I don't know, Kelly," he said finally, looking at the floor. "It's still hard for me." She swallowed, and he noticed her fingers tremble slightly. "I understand," she answered quietly, "and I'm not asking you to forget or forgive me right now. Just give me a chance to show that I want to fix this. One dinner. If you want to leave after, I won't keep you." Matt was silent, replaying her words in his head. It was not just food, it was an attempt to reach out across the gap that had grown between them. He didn't know if he was ready to take that hand, but something in her voice, the vulnerability, almost desperation, made him think. Maybe she really is sorry. Maybe these are not empty words, but a step that she herself finds difficult. "Okay," he said finally, looking up at her. "One dinner." Her face lit up with a faint, cautious smile, the first in days that didn't look forced. "Thank you," she said, and there was so much relief in her voice that he almost felt a pang of guilt for his coldness. "I'll cook lasagna. You love lasagna, right? He nodded, remembering how she made it for their first anniversary with slightly burnt cheese, but so delicious that he spent 3 days eating the leftovers. It was one of those memories he clung to, trying to hold their marriage in his head. Yes, I love you, he answered quietly. Kelly nodded as if ending the conversation. Then at 7, I'll start cooking. She turned to the door, but stopped. Matt, I really want us to make it. He didn't answer, just watched her leave. When her footsteps died away in the kitchen, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Dinner. It was so simple, but at the same time so difficult. He didn't know if he could sit at the table with her and not think about that evening, about Trevor, about her confession. But she tried, he saw that. And maybe he should have tried it too, if only to see if there was anything left between them that was worth fighting for. The rest of the day passed in strange silence. He could hear Kelly busying herself in the kitchen, the clinking of dishes, the hiss of the oven, the quiet rustling of bags. The smell of tomato sauce and melting cheese began to permeate the house, and it was almost unbearably familiar. He stayed in the office, pretending to be working, but really just waiting for the clock to creep up to 7. When she called to him, "Matt, everything is ready," he stood up, feeling his heart beating a little faster than necessary. The table in the dining room was set simply 2 plates, glasses of water, a dish with lasagna in the center. Kelly stood nearby, wiping her hands on a towel, looking almost as nervous as he felt. "Sit down," she said, pointing to his usual place. He sat down, and she sat down opposite him. Silence hung between them as she cut the lasagna and served him a piece. It was a small gesture, but it had something of their old life, the one where they cared for each other without words. Matt looked at the food, feeling the cold inside him recede a little, but did not disappear completely. "Thank you," he said, taking the fork. Kelly smiled, weakly but sincerely. "Eat it while it's hot," she answered. And they began to eat, slowly, carefully, as if each bite was a step on thin ice. It was an attempt not ideal, not magical, but real. And Matt didn't know where she would take them, but for now he was here, at this table, with her. Matt left the house to get some air. Being confined within 4 walls was becoming unbearable, even after dinner with Kelly the night before. The lasagna was delicious, the conversation was quiet and awkward, but it was a step, a small bridge across the abyss, and he was still trying to figure out whether he wanted to continue along it. He put on an old jacket, put his hands in his pockets, and walked along the street, not really thinking about the route. I just needed to move so that my thoughts didn't spiral into an endless spiral. Suburbia lived its normal life. A dog was barking somewhere, a neighbor 2 doors down was busy with his lawnmower, and the sounds of a morning show on the radio could be heard from the open window. Matt walked, looking at his feet, until he heard a familiar voice calling his name. "Matt, hey Matt." He looked up and saw Jessica walking towards him from the opposite side of the street. She carried a canvas bag filled with groceries and waved her free hand with such energy as if she hadn't seen him in years. She was wearing a bright yellow sweater and jeans, and her blonde hair was bouncing in a high ponytail. Her smile, as always, was wide and sincere, but Matt noticed slight shadows under her eyes, as if she, too, had not gotten enough sleep. "Hey, Jess," he said, stopping. His voice was even, but inside he was tense. He hadn't seen her or Trevor since the party, and the thought of talking to someone from their house gave him mixed feelings. "How are you?" she asked, shifting the bag to her other hand. "I haven't seen you for 100 years. How did you and Kelly recover after that party?" Matt forced a weak smile, trying not to show how much the question hurt him. "Yes, okay," he answered, shrugging his shoulders. "I was just busy. Work, you know." Jessica nodded, as if taking it at face value, and stepped closer to avoid shouting across the road. "Oh, I understand. I've been feeling dizzy lately, too," she said, rolling her eyes. "Trevor has gone completely crazy with his ideas. Either a bar in the garage or some trips with friends. I tell him, maybe we can put things in order at home first, and he just laughs." Matt nodded, not knowing what to say. The mention of Trevor pricked him like a needle, but he tried not to show it. He looked at Jessica, at her open face, and wondered if she knew anything about what happened in the backyard. She seemed as carefree as ever, but something in her tone, the slight weariness hidden behind a smile, made him wary. "How are you?" he asked, more out of politeness than out of interest. Jessica sighed, sagging her shoulders slightly. "Yes, it's fine," she said, but then corrected herself. "Well, almost. Trevor, you know, he's so fidgety. Lately, he has been dabbling on the side, a lot, as I call it. He goes somewhere, returns late, all in his own thoughts. I don't even know where he goes half the time." Matt froze, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. "He's playing around on the side." The phrase sounded so casual, almost joking, but for him it was like a punch in the gut. He looked at Jessica, wondering if she realized what she had just said and if she knew more than she was saying. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm, although everything was boiling inside. Jessica shrugged, throwing her bag back over her other shoulder. "Oh, nothing specific," she said, waving her hand. "He's just so. Trevor. Loves attention, loves when there is fuss around him. I'm used to him sometimes disappearing with friends or someone else. He says he's relaxing. But I'm not a fool. I see that he doesn't always drink beer with Mark, you know." She laughed, briefly and a little nervously, but something flashed in her eyes, either irritation or humility. Matt looked at her, his mind frantically putting the pieces together. Jessica clearly didn't know about Kelly or didn't want to know. But her words, so light and casual, stuck in his head like a thorn. "He's playing around on the side." It wasn't just about friends or beer. It was about Trevor, who doesn't know how to control himself, who oversteps boundaries, who kisses other people's wives in backyards. "Aren't you worried about this?" he asked, unable to resist. The question came out on its own, and he immediately regretted asking it. Jessica looked at him, narrowing her eyes slightly, but then smiled again. "Am I worried? Well, sometimes," she admitted. "But Trevor is Trevor. He always comes home, always says that I am his main. Maybe I'm just tired of keeping an eye on him. As long as he doesn't make a mess in our house, and the rest. Let him have fun until he gets tired of it." She said it with such ease that Matt was taken aback for a second. Has Jessica, with her naive smile and endless optimism, simply resigned herself to the fact that her husband is playing around, or did she really not understand how far this went? He opened his mouth to say something, but decided against it. It's none of his business. Not here, not now. "Okay, I have to go," Jessica said, nodding at her bag. "The milk will defrost if I talk any longer." "See you, Matt. Say hi to Kelly." "Yeah, I'll tell you," he muttered, following her with his gaze until she disappeared around the corner. He remained standing on the sidewalk, feeling the wind cool his face. "He's playing around on the side." These words were spinning in my head like an annoying melody that was impossible to get rid of. Jessica abandoned them so easily, as if it were a small thing, part of their family routine. But for Matt, this was more than just a phrase. It was confirmation that Trevor was not just joking with Kelly that night. It was his style, his habit, his way of living. And Kelly, drunk, confused, tired of her and Matt's routine, became part of it. Matt shoved his hands deeper into his pockets and walked on, but now each step was harder. He remembered dinner with Kelly, her attempt to get closer, her "I'm sorry." She blamed the wine, said it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But if Trevor plays around all the time, if that's his nature, then what does that mean for her? Was she just a random victim of his charm, or was this not the first time she had succumbed? Jessica might not have known the details, but her words opened a Pandora's box in Matt's head, and now he couldn't close it. He stopped at the intersection, looking at the empty street. The cold wind ruffled his hair, but he barely noticed it. "He's playing around on the side." The phrase stuck like a bone in his throat, and he knew it would haunt him until he figured out what to do next. Kelly wanted to fix their marriage, but now Matt doubted whether he could trust her if Trevor was not just a mistake for her, but part of something bigger. The day after meeting Jessica passed in a strange tension, as if the air in the house had become thicker. Matt tried to distract himself. He sorted out work letters, fixed a creaking closet door, even went out into the yard to mow the lawn, although the grass had not yet had time to really grow after the winter. But Jessica's words, "He's playing around on the side," didn't let go. They clung to his every step like thorns. He looked at Kelly, who was sitting in the living room with a book, and found himself searching for something in her, some hint, some sign that would confirm or refute his doubts. She seemed calm, almost normal, but this calm now looked suspicious. By evening, he couldn't stand it. Kelly went into the shower, leaving her phone on the kitchen table, carelessly, as she had done hundreds of times before. Matt has never been one to snoop around in other people's things. He trusted her, always had, even when their marriage began to fall apart at the seams in recent months. But now this trust was like thin ice, and he felt it crunch under his feet. He walked over to the table, looking at the black screen of his phone. His hand froze in the air, and he almost retreated, but the voice in his head, the one that whispered about Trevor, about the backyard, about her disheveled hair, pushed him forward. He picked up the phone, feeling his heart beat faster. The screen lit up. When touched, she didn't set a password. She never did, because "we have nothing to hide," as she once said with a smile. Matt opened the Messages app, trying not to think about what he was doing. It was wrong, he knew it, but he couldn't stop. First, he scrolled through recent chats. There were colleagues from school, a couple of girlfriends, a message from himself from last week. "Buy milk, please." Nothing unusual. He was about to put the phone back when he noticed the Deleted Messages tab. His finger hovered over the screen. Deleted messages. Kelly never cleared out her chats. He himself sometimes made fun of her for keeping her phone full of old messages about school meetings and recipes. Why would she delete anything? He clicked on the tab, and the list loaded, empty rows where text had once been, now erased, but with contact names next to them. And among them, almost at the very top, was a name: Trevor. Matt felt the blood drain from his face. He could not read the messages. They were deleted, beyond the possibility of recovery without special programs that he did not have. But the dates remain. The last message from Trevor was sent 2 days ago, on Wednesday, when Matt was at work and Kelly said she was late at school. Another one was last week, on the day she went grocery shopping and came back later than usual. And then a chain of dates going back to that very party and even earlier. Dozens of messages, maybe more, all erased, but their traces remain like ghosts. He put the phone back on the table, trying to do it quietly, although his hands were shaking. The sound of the shower was still coming from above, which meant he had time to collect his thoughts. But my thoughts ran away like cockroaches from the light. She talked to Trevor. Not just once, not by accident, but regularly. And she deleted it. Why? If it was just a mistake, just a drunk moment, as she claimed, why hide it? Why erase traces? Matt walked into the living room, sat down on the couch, and put his head in his hands. His mind was painting pictures of Kelly secretly typing messages, Trevor answering her with that smirk of his, their correspondence full of something he wasn't supposed to see. Maybe it was innocent friendly jokes, neighborly gossip. But then why delete? He remembered her words. It doesn't mean anything. Now those words sounded like lies, and he hated himself for believing her for even a minute. The bathroom door opened, and Kelly came downstairs, wrapped in a towel, her hair wet. She walked into the kitchen, not noticing his tension, and took the phone, throwing it into her purse. "Are you going to have dinner?" she asked, turning to him. Her voice was soft, almost caring, like it had been during their dinner the night before. Matt looked up at her, and for the first time in a long time, there was no warmth in him, only cold and something sharp, like a blade. "You talked to Trevor," he said, not asking, but affirming. His voice was quiet, but there was a heaviness in it. Kelly froze, her hand frozen on her purse. She looked at him, panic flashing in her eyes, quickly replaced by an attempt to hide it. "What?" she asked, a little too loudly. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the deleted messages," he continued, without looking away. "On your phone. With him. Lots of messages." Her face turned pale, and she pressed her lips together, as if searching for words. Matt waited, feeling a storm growing inside him. It was the first time he'd caught her doing anything specific, and it changed everything. "It's not what you think," she finally began, taking a step towards him. "We just chatted sometimes. About neighbor affairs, about the party. Nothing like that." "Then why delete it?" he interrupted, his voice louder than he expected. "If it's nothing like that, why hide it?" Kelly fell silent, looking at him. Her hands nervously fiddled with the edge of the towel, and he saw how she was struggling with herself, either to come up with an excuse or to tell the truth. "I didn't want you to misunderstand," she said finally, quietly, almost in a whisper. "After that night, I knew you were angry. I didn't want to upset you even more." Matt looked at her, and something heavy like a stone grew in his chest. This was not an explanation, it was an excuse. He stood up, feeling the distance between them become not just cold, but real discord. "You're lying, Kelly," he said, and the words came out with pain that he could no longer contain. "You communicated with him after everything that happened and hid it. This is not neighborhood business. This is something different." "Matt, please," she stepped towards him, holding out her hand, but he retreated. "I didn't want to hide anything. I just—" "That's enough," he snapped, raising his palm. "I don't want to hear it now. I need to think." He turned and walked towards the stairs, leaving her standing in the middle of the kitchen. She didn't call out to him, didn't try to stop him, and that silence was louder than any words. Matt went up to the bedroom, closed the door, and leaned his back against it, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. The deleted messages were the first real evidence, not just suspicion, not just Jessica's words, but something he saw with his own eyes. And it shattered the last vestiges of trust he had tried to maintain. He sat on the bed, looking into space. The discord between them was now not just a crack, it was an abyss, and he did not know how to cross it. Kelly could say whatever she wanted, but those erased lines on her phone screamed louder than her excuses. For the first time, he thought not about how to save their marriage, but about whether it was worth saving at all. It had been several days since Matt had found the deleted messages on Kelly's phone, and the house that had once been their shared sanctuary now seemed divided by an invisible wall. The morning started the same way. He woke up on the couch in the living room, where he moved after that fight, listened to Kelly quietly go downstairs, make coffee, and leave for school without saying a word beyond what was necessary. The evenings went the same way. She cooked dinner, left a plate for him on the table, and she ate alone while he sat at his laptop in the office, pretending to work. They lived under the same roof, but as if in different dimensions, where every step, every sound was saturated with coldness and understatement. Matt stood at the kitchen window, watching the morning fog slowly dissipate over the neighboring yards. In his hands, he held a mug of cold coffee. He poured it more out of habit than out of desire to drink. Kelly left half an hour ago, leaving a short, "see you in the evening," to which he responded with the same dry, "uh-huh." This was their communication, now short phrases, devoid of warmth, like telegrams between strangers. He didn't even remember the last time they touched each other, neither an accidental touch at the table, nor the usual good night. All that was left was a void that he didn't know how to fill. He put the mug in the sink and returned to the office, where his laptop was already waiting for him with his work email open. Work became his salvation, or rather, a refuge where he dived in order not to think. A new project had started at an IT company, and he took on more tasks than usual: code, calls, debugging bugs. He immersed himself in it, sitting at the table until midnight, until the screen began to blur before his eyes. But even there, among the lines of code and endless notifications, he could not completely drown out what was growing inside: resentment, thick and heavy, like damp earth after rain. Every time he closed his laptop, he was left alone with himself, and his thoughts returned to Kelly, to Trevor, to those deleted messages. He didn't ask her again after that fight. She tried to talk again, but he cut her off, saying he was not ready. She retreated, and from then on they simply existed side by side, like neighbors, connected by a common space, but not by life. He heard her turn on the TV in the evenings, how she called someone, probably a friend, but she spoke quietly so that he could not understand the words. He noticed how she left him food, but did not call him to the table as before. It was a silent agreement not to touch each other, not to get into the wounds that were still bleeding. But there was no silence inside Matt. Resentment grew like a weed growing through concrete. He was angry with her for letting Trevor cross the line, for communicating with him afterward, for hiding it. He was angry with himself for not noticing earlier, for believing her, it doesn't mean anything, for now not knowing how to live with it. And the feeling of betrayal, sharp as a shard of glass, gnawed at him every time he thought that she had chosen not just a mistake, but a lie. She could have told him right away. She could have not deleted the messages. She could have not gone to that backyard. But she did the opposite, and now he felt deceived not only that night, but in all the days after. He opened his laptop, trying to get back to work. Another request from a colleague appeared on the screen, something about a bug in the system that needed to be sorted out by morning. Matt began to type, but his fingers moved slower than usual. Kelly stood before his eyes, not the one who cooked him lasagna a couple of days ago, but the one who stood against the wall of Trevor's house, laughed with him, allowed him. He clenched his fists, slamming them on the table so that the pen jumped and rolled to the floor. The silence of the house immediately answered him with a booming echo, and he froze, listening to see if she had returned. But no, he was alone. Matt stood up, walked to the office window, and looked out onto the street. Trevor and Jessica's house was visible across the street. The lights were off, and for some reason this brought him a strange sense of relief. He hadn't seen Trevor since that night, and it was for the best. He didn't know what he would do if he came face to face with him. Punching his grinning face seemed like a tempting idea, but Matt wasn't the type to solve problems with his fists. Instead, he carried this anger inside, and it ate away at him like acid. Returning to the table, he tried to concentrate again. Work was his anchor, the only thing that kept him afloat in this sea of silence and pain. But even she could not completely drown out the questions that were swirling in her head. What was in those messages? How long did it last? Was there something else she didn't say? He didn't ask because he was afraid of the answers, afraid that they would destroy even the fragile semblance of normality that remained. Kelly returned in the evening while he was still sitting at his laptop. He heard the door open and the rustling of packages. She apparently entered the store. She walked into the kitchen, and a minute later the smell of heated food reached him, some kind of soup, judging by the aroma. Previously, she would have called him, said something like, "Go eat while it's hot." Now she simply put the plate on the table and went into the living room. Matt waited until she turned on the TV before leaving the office. The plate stood in its place. Next to it was a spoon and a glass of water. He sat down, looking at the food, but did not eat. It was her silent, "I'm still here," but it didn't warm her. He felt like a stranger at this table, in this house, in this life. The resentment grew, and with it a sense of betrayal grew, not only because of what she had done, but because she continued to remain silent, as if she hoped that time would fix everything. Matt stood up, leaving the soup untouched, and returned to the office. He turned on the laptop, opened the project, and stared at the screen, not seeing the letters. Work might distract him from talking, from touching, from Kelly, but not from what he felt inside. This period of silence was not just a pause, it was a new reality where they were not husband and wife, but two people who had lost each other, but were still too stubborn to admit it. A foggy Saturday morning brought with it an unexpected doorbell. Matt, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, flinched at the sharp sound that broke the usual silence of the house. Kelly, who was busy with the dishes at the sink, also froze, casting a quick glance at him, but did not move. In recent days, their silent coexistence had become almost a ritual, and none of them was in a hurry to break it without a good reason. Matt stood up, feeling the tension in his shoulders increase, and walked towards the door. Jessica stood in the doorway, beaming as always, wearing a bright green sweater and holding a basket of homemade cookies. Her smile was as wide as it had been on the street that day, but now it seemed almost out of place to Matt. "Hello, Matt," she chirped, holding out the basket. "This is for you and Kelly. I baked it yesterday. I also have news, Trevor, and I have decided to have dinner tonight, and we really want you to come." Matt took the basket, not immediately finding the words. Dinner, with Trevor and Jessica. He felt everything tighten inside him, but tried not to show it. "Thanks, Jess," he said, trying to sound neutral. "What is the reason?" "No reason," she waved her hand. "We just haven't seen you for a long time. We miss you." "Well, Trevor said that it was time to get together like neighbors. We're here at 7, nothing complicated, just food, wine, and we'll chat. Will you come?" Matt hesitated. The last thing he wanted was to sit at the same table as Trevor, looking at his grin and knowing that he had kissed his wife. But at the same time, something inside pushed him to agree. Maybe this is a chance to clarify the situation, to see how Trevor behaves, how Kelly reacts. Maybe it would give him the answers he couldn't find in their silence. "I'll talk to Kelly," he finally said, "but most likely we will come." "Oh, great," Jessica clapped her hands. "Then see you tonight, Matt." She flew away, leaving him with the basket and a vague feeling of anxiety. He closed the door and walked back into the kitchen, where Kelly was still standing at the sink, drying her hands on a towel. "Jessica invited us to dinner," he said, putting the basket on the table. "Today at 7. Kelly looked at him, and a shadow flashed in her eyes, either surprise or concern. "To their home?" she clarified. Her voice was quiet but tense. "Yes," Matt nodded, watching her reaction. "I said we'll probably come." She pursed her lips as if she wanted to object, but instead she simply nodded. "Okay," she said briefly and turned to the sink, continuing to wash the plate, although it was already shiny. Matt looked at her back, feeling the familiar cold between them grow even thicker. She didn't ask why he agreed, didn't try to refuse. This silence spoke more than words, and he realized that this dinner would be more than just a neighborly meeting. At 7 in the evening, they stood outside Trevor and Jessica's house, holding a bottle of wine that Kelly had insisted on taking. She was wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back into a low bun, nothing provocative, but Matt noticed how she looked in the mirror for a long time before leaving, as if checking if everything was in order. He put on a dark blue shirt and jeans himself, feeling more like he was at an interview than at a dinner. They didn't speak on the way, just a short, "Let's go," when he opened the door. Jessica greeted them with a squeal of joy, hugging Kelly and then Matt, despite his obvious stiffness. "You have arrived. Come on in. Everything is ready." She dragged them into the living room, where the table was set for 4. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, salad, and a bottle of red wine. The garlands were still hanging from the party, giving the room a cozy but slightly theatrical feel. Trevor emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on the apron that looked ridiculous on him. His wide smile and casually unbuttoned shirt were the same as always, and Matt felt something dark simmering inside him. "Well, finally, a star couple," Trevor exclaimed, spreading his arms. "I thought you'd forgotten us." "Kelly, you are just fired today, as always." "Matt, man, good to see you." Matt nodded, clenching his jaw to keep from saying something harsh. Kelly smiled weakly, but her gaze immediately slid to the side, avoiding Trevor. They sat down at the table, Matt across from Trevor, Kelly across from Jessica, and tension hung in the air, despite Jessica's chatter about the chicken recipe. "This is my secret marinade," she chirped, serving everyone portions. "Lemon, rosemary, and a little honey." Trevor said, "I'm a genius." "She's a genius when she's not setting the kitchen on fire," Trevor chimed in, winking at Kelly. "Remember how I told you about that fire in Mexico? Jess could give that guy a head start." Kelly chuckled briefly, but her smile was forced, and she immediately looked down at her plate. Matt noticed how she avoided looking at Trevor, how her fingers nervously clutched her fork. He was silent, slowly chewing his food, but his eyes followed every movement at the table. Trevor, as usual, filled the silence. He was chatting about some of his plans, either opening a bar or going to the mountains with friends, and his voice hummed like a radio that could not be turned off. Jessica agreed and laughed, but Matt could see how her smile sometimes faded when Trevor got too carried away. "And you, Kelly, how are things at school?" Trevor suddenly asked, leaning a little closer to her across the table. "Still tormenting children with Shakespeare?" The question was simple, but there was something in his tone, a slight playfulness, a hint that Matt caught immediately. Kelly looked up and their eyes met Trevor's for a second. She quickly looked away. Yes, as usual, she answered quietly, almost in a whisper. Nothing new. Well, if anything happens, call me for help. Trevor laughed. I can play Romeo. Or at least give them tequila to drink so they don't get bored. Jessica laughed, slapping his arm. Trevor, stop it. Kelly is already suffering with them, and you will make it even worse. Matt watched this, feeling the tension building inside him. The joke was stupid, typical of Trevor, but there was something personal about it, like he was testing boundaries. Kelly didn't answer, just took a sip of wine, her hand shaking slightly as she put the glass back. Matt was silent, but his gaze became heavier, and Trevor seemed to notice it. What do you say, Matt? Trevor turned to him, grinning. Maybe we can have a party in the office. You're an it guy. You'll connect us to music through the server. I'm not in the mood for a party, Matt replied, his voice colder than he'd intended. I work a lot. Trevor raised his eyebrows, but didn't back down. Well, you have to relax sometimes, dude. Life is short, you know. I know, Matt said shortly, looking straight at him. There was something in his tone that made Trevor pause for a second, but he immediately laughed and waved it off. Jessica, not noticing the tension, began talking about a new dessert recipe, but Matt was barely listening. He looked at Kelly, at her downcast eyes, at her silence, and at Trevor, who acted as if nothing had happened. It was unbearable. He came here for answers, but instead he received only new questions. Was there something else between them? Did Trevor know what he knew? And why is Kelly silent, as if she's afraid to say too much? The dinner dragged on, and every sip of wine, every inappropriate joke from Trevor only intensified this feeling. Matt decided that he would no longer remain silent, not today, not after this. But for now he sat, clutching his fork, waiting for the moment to figure out how to pull the truth out of this forced, false scene. A few weeks have passed since that dinner at Trevor and Jessica's, and life in Matt and Kelly's house has finally turned into a quiet but unbearable stagnation. The tension of that evening, Trevor's jokes, Kelly's silence, Matt's cold gaze left hanging in the air like smoke that won't go away. They returned home in silence, and since then their communication has not gone beyond short phrases about everyday trifles. Have you taken out the trash? I'll be late at work. Matt was immersed in projects, spending nights on his laptop, and Kelly also seemed to be looking for refuge in school, in books, on long walks that she did not talk about. But this silence could not last forever. It was like a stretched string, ready to burst. Friday evening found Matt in the living room. He sat on the couch, leafing through some old magazine he found under his pillow, just to keep his hands busy while the TV murmured quietly in the background. It was drizzling outside the window, and the drops tapped on the glass, creating a rhythm that almost lulled you to sleep. Kelly returned later than usual. He heard the front door slam and her shoes rustle in the hallway. She entered the living room without taking off her coat and stood at the threshold, looking at him. She had a bag in her hands, but she put it on the floor as if deciding that it was not important. Matt, she said quietly, and there was something new in her voice, not fatigue, not irritation, but some strange determination. We need to talk. He looked up from the magazine, feeling his stomach sink. Those words, we need to talk, sounded like a warning, and he wasn't sure he wanted to hear what came next. But he nodded, closed the magazine, and put it on the table. Okay, he said, trying not to let his voice show any tension. Speak. Kelly took off her coat, hung it over the back of her chair, and sat down opposite him on the edge of the chair. Her hands rested on her knees, her fingers clasped together nervously, but she didn't look away. The rain outside the window became louder, as if emphasizing the silence between them. I thought for a long time, she began, and her voice trembled, but she quickly pulled herself together. After everything that happened, after Trevor, after you found the messages, I know you don't believe me, and I don't blame you, but I want to be honest. Not just about that night, but in general. Matt sat up straighter, feeling his heart beat faster. He had been waiting for this, the truth, whatever it was, but now that the moment had come, he was afraid to hear it. He was silent, allowing her to continue. I always felt like there was something missing in our marriage, she said, and every word fell like a stone. It's not that I don't love you, I do, Matt, I really do. But the last few years, I don't know how to explain. It's like we're stuck. You work, I work, we live together, but I don't feel life, passion, something that makes your heart beat faster. He looked at her, and pain grew in his chest, not sharp, like from a blow, but dull, deep, like from an old wound that had been touched again. He wanted to object, to say that it was not true, that their marriage was good, stable, real. But the words stuck in his throat, because somewhere inside he knew that she was right. He also felt this emptiness. He just didn't want to notice it. And what? He asked finally, his voice hoarse. Does that justify what you did to Trevor? Kelly shook her head, her eyes shining with tears. No, she said quickly, this is not an excuse. What I did was a mistake. It was stupid, and I hate myself for it. But I can't pretend I didn't feel anything before that night. I was lost. And Trevor, he's not important, Matt, trust me. He was just there, with his stupid jokes and this energy that I probably lacked. I didn't want him. I wanted to feel alive. Matt clenched his fists, feeling the resentment that had been building for weeks rise up in his throat. Her words were like a knife, not because she blamed him, but because they exposed what he himself was afraid to think about. Their marriage became a routine, comfortable, familiar, but devoid of the fire that was in the beginning. And now she was saying it to his face, and it hurt both of them. You could have told me, he said, and his voice wavered. If you were missing something, why didn't you talk to me? Instead of that. Kelly wiped a tear that rolled down her cheek and nodded. I know, she whispered. I had to, but I was afraid. I was afraid that you wouldn't understand, that it would sound like an accusation, and I didn't want to hurt you. But in the end, it made it worse. He looked at her wet eyes, at her trembling hands, and felt rage and pity fighting inside. She was honest for the first time in a long time, but this honesty cut him like glass. He had always thought their marriage was good enough, not perfect, but strong. And now she said that he did not give her what she needed, and it hit his pride, his love, everything that he considered them to have in common. So what now? He asked, and there was more weariness than anger in his voice. You said it. What's next? Kelly swallowed, looking at him with some kind of desperate hope. I don't know, she admitted. I want us to try again, but not like before. I want us to be honest with each other, so that you know how I feel, and so that I know how you feel. But if you can't, if you don't want to after everything, I'll understand. Matt looked away, looking at the rain outside the window. Her confession hurt, not just because of what she said, but because it made him look at himself. He also felt this emptiness, this coldness, but he blamed her, Trevor, the circumstances. And now she was saying it was deeper than that, and he didn't know how to deal with it. I need to think, he said finally, getting up from the sofa. I can't answer you right now. She nodded, not trying to stop him. Okay, she said quietly. I'll wait. Matt walked past her, went up to the office, and closed the door. He sat down at the table, but did not turn on the laptop. He just sat, listening to the rain and feeling her words settling in him like wet sand. It wasn't just about Trevor. It wasn't just about that night. It was about them, about their marriage, about what they were both missing. And this revelation was painful because it forced him to choose whether to fight for them or let them go. But for now, he didn't know what he had the strength for. The rain that began the day before did not stop, turning Saturday into a gray, dull infinity. Matt sat in his office, staring at the blank screen of his laptop, which he hadn't turned on since Kelly's confession. Her words, I always felt like something was missing, echoed in his head, mingling with the sound of raindrops outside the window. He had not slept half the night, lying on the sofa, and now fatigue was pressing on his shoulders, but sleep did not come. Instead, his mind was spinning in a whirlpool of doubt, torn between two paths, leaving or staying. He stood up, went to the window, and looked out at the wet street. Suburbia seemed extinct, no cars, no neighbors, only rain and silence. The loneliness was almost palpable, and Matt suddenly realized how much it surrounded him. Even with Kelly under the same roof, he felt lonely not just because of her actions, but because their connection, their closeness, had evaporated somewhere over the years. Her confession had opened it up like a knife opening an old wound, and now he didn't know if he could stitch it back up. Break up the marriage. This thought came to him more and more often, especially after he found the deleted messages, after dinner with Trevor, after her words about emptiness. It would be easier to leave to throw off this burden, start over, free from pain, resentment, betrayal. He imagined packing his things, renting an apartment somewhere in the city, leaving this house with his memories behind. Maybe then he could breathe more freely, not see her face every day, not wonder whether she was lying or not. But then he thought about 10 years together, about laughter, about travel, about how they chose this sofa, arguing about which color was better. And this thought to give up everything seemed like a betrayal, not only of her, but also of himself. Return everything. It was more difficult, almost impossible. How can he regain trust when he can still see Trevor leaning towards her? How can I forget her words that he lacked something for her? He would like to feel warm again when she is around. He would like to believe that they could be not just neighbors, but husband and wife. But every time he tried to imagine it, that night, her disheveled hair, her evasive answers appeared before his eyes. And he doubted whether he had the strength to forgive, whether she had the desire to really change. Matt returned to the table, sat down, and put his head in his hands. This internal crisis was like a storm tearing him apart. He felt weak, lost, unable to make a decision. Loneliness was pressing, and he realized that he could no longer simply remain silent, not with her, not with himself. He needed a conversation, a real one, without omissions, even if he would completely break it. He walked downstairs to where Kelly was sitting in the kitchen, looking into the cup of tea she held in her hands. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and a look of worry flashed in her eyes. Her hair was loose, her face was pale, without a trace of makeup. She looked vulnerable, almost fragile. "We need to talk," he said, sitting down opposite. His voice was quiet but firm. "For real." Kelly nodded, setting her cup down on the table. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't look away. "Okay," she said. "I'm ready." Matt took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. He didn't know where to start, but the words came out on their own. "I don't know what to do, Kelly," he admitted. "After everything you said yesterday, about us, about what you were missing, I don't know if I can survive this. To leave or to stay, I'm torn, and it's killing me. But I can't decide until I understand everything completely. About that night, about Trevor. What really happened there?" Kelly looked at him, and her eyes began to shine with tears. She pursed her lips, as if struggling with herself, and then spoke slowly, quietly, but without the same evasiveness. "I wasn't just drunk," she said, and every word was difficult for her. "I blamed the wine because it's easier. But this is not true. I I deliberately allowed this to happen. Not from the beginning, but when he started flirting when we went into the backyard. I didn't stop him right away. I knew what I was doing, Matt. I felt bad, I was tired, lost, and he gave me something that I hadn't felt in a long time. Attention. Feeling like I'm alive. And I let it escalate into that kiss, into his hands on me. I stopped him later, but not right away, and I hate myself for it." Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Matt looked at her, feeling his insides go cold. It was worse than he expected. Not just a mistake, not just alcohol, she made a choice, even if for a moment, but she made it. And it broke him, because it confirmed the worst. She was looking for something outside of their marriage, deliberately, not by accident. He was silent, not knowing what to say. The pain was too great to result in screaming or accusations. He just sat there, looking at her as she cried, and felt the loneliness grow even deeper. Her confession did not give him clarity, it only intensified the crisis. She looked up, wiping her tears with her sleeve, her voice shaking as she spoke again. "I didn't want to lose you," she whispered. "I thought I could forget it, that it wouldn't change anything. But I was wrong, and I don't know how to fix it. Tell me what to do, Matt, please." He looked at her wet face, at her despair, and could not find words. His mind screamed to leave, quit, run away from this pain. But the heart, what was still left of their 10 years, was silent, not giving an answer. He stood up, feeling like his legs could barely support him. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice empty. "I need time." He turned and walked into the office, leaving her sitting at the desk. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, and he leaned his back against it, feeling the tears sting his eyes but not fall. Her confession was like the final nail, not in their marriage, but in his belief that he could save it. And now he was faced with a choice he didn't want to make, with a loneliness that was tearing him apart. Matt spent the morning in the office, not working, just sitting in his chair, looking at the wall where there was an old photograph of him and Kelly on the beach, smiling, tanned, happy. It was 5 years ago, in another life, and now this picture seemed almost a mockery to him. After her confession yesterday that she deliberately allowed Trevor to cross the line, he could not find peace. The night passed in half asleep, full of fragments of thoughts, and by morning he realized that he could no longer live in this limbo. He came down around noon. Kelly was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book that, judging by her unmoving gaze, she wasn't reading. Her eyes were red, her face tired, but she raised her head when she heard his footsteps. Matt stopped at the threshold, feeling the words he had been rehearsing in his head getting stuck in his throat. But he forced himself to speak. "Kelly," he began, and his voice was low, almost alien. "I thought, we need to break up. For a while." She blinked as if she didn't immediately understand what he said. The book fell from her hands onto the pillow, but she did not bend down to pick it up. Her gaze met his, and there was so much pain and confusion in it that Matt almost backed down from his decision. But he stood with his fists clenched in his pockets, waiting for her answer. "Should we break up?" she asked quietly, as if tasting the word. "Yes," he nodded. "I can't do this anymore. After everything you said yesterday. I don't know who we are now. I can't pretend that nothing has changed, but I'm not ready to leave completely yet. I need time, space, and probably you too." Kelly looked at him, and her lips trembled. She nodded slowly, as if agreeing not with him, but with inevitability. "Okay," she said finally, her voice hoarse with suppressed tears. "If you think it would be better, I agree." Matt expected her to argue, to ask him to stay, to convince him that they could make things right. Her agreement hit him harder than he thought as confirmation that their marriage was indeed broken. He nodded, not knowing what else to say. "I'll rent an apartment," he continued, trying to focus on the practical. "For a couple of months, maybe more. Let's see what happens next." "Will I stay here?" she asked, and a hint of fear flashed in her tone. "Yes," he answered. "This is your home too. I don't want to kick you out." She nodded again, looking down at her hands in her lap. Silence hung between them, thick and heavy, like wet air outside the window. Matt felt something inside him collapsing, not with a roar, but quietly, like a sand castle under the waves. He suggested this not because he wanted to leave forever, but because he saw no other way out. But now that the words had been spoken, he did not understand what lay ahead. "Do you think this will help?" she asked suddenly, looking up at him. Her eyes sparkled, but no tears flowed yet. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Maybe, yes. Maybe not. But I can't live with you now, Kelly. Not like before. I need to figure myself out. And probably you too." She swallowed, and her hands clenched into fists. "I didn't want it to end like this," she said quietly. I hoped that we could find a way back." Matt looked at her, his chest pounding at her words. He also hoped once, before Trevor, before the messages, before her confessions. But now this hope was like a shadow that he could not catch. "Maybe we'll find it," he said, although he didn't fully believe it. "But not now. Not like that." Kelly nodded a third time, and now tears did roll down her cheeks. She didn't wipe away the object's tears. She just sat there looking at him, as if trying to remember this moment. Matt felt his own eyes sting, but he held it in. He didn't want to cry, not in front of her, not now. "When will you leave?" she asked, and her voice trembled. "Soon," He replied, "Tomorrow I'll start looking for a place. In a couple of days, probably." She nodded again, and that was the last thing she said. Matt turned and walked into the office, closing the door behind him. He sat down at the table, looking at the photograph on the wall, and felt the loneliness that he had been carrying within himself for weeks become even deeper. They both agreed to this separation, but neither of them knew what would happen next, whether it would save them or be the end point. Only one thing was clear. Their marriage, as it had been before, quiet, stable, full of small joys, had disappeared forever, and what would replace him was hidden in a fog that he could not see. He took out his phone and began looking for advertisements for rental apartments, moving mechanically as if this could drown out the pain. Kelly remained in the living room, and he heard her sobbing quietly, but he did not go to her. They made a choice, or rather, they accepted that they no longer had a choice. And now they could only wait to see what this temporary farewell would bring, knowing that there would be no turning back. 2 months flew by in a blur, leaving behind only vague outlines of my former life. Kelly sat at the kitchen table in their home, now here's looking at the stack of unopened letters that had accumulated over the past weeks. She hardly left her routine. School, home, rare calls to friends who tried to drag her out for coffee. But it was quiet inside her, not calm, but empty, as if someone had turned off the sound. The breakup with Matt that they had agreed on that rainy day became reality. He moved out 3 days after their conversation, taking a couple of suitcases and a laptop, and since then they saw each other only once, when he stopped by to pick up forgotten books. Then he looked tired, but collected, and their conversation was limited to a short, "How are you?" and "Fine." The morning was cold. With the first hints of autumn, the leaves outside the window began to turn yellow, and the air smelled damp. Kelly poured herself some coffee, more out of habit than desire, and began sorting out the mail to keep her hands busy. Invoices, flyers, notice from school, everything was familiar until her fingers came across a thick envelope with an official stamp. She froze when she saw the return address, a law firm in the city center. Her heart skipped a beat, and she slowly opened the envelope, feeling her fingers tremble slightly. Inside was a divorce notice. The paper was dry, formal, with clear lines about divorce by mutual consent and a court date in 2 weeks. Next to it was a second sheet of paper, a handwritten letter, and she recognized Matt's handwriting immediately, even before she saw his signature. Kelly put the notice down and picked up the letter, feeling her throat tighten. "Kelly, I thought for a long time about what to write, and perhaps this letter is the last thing I can tell you. 2 months ago, I left because I didn't know how to stay. I thought that time would give me answers whether I could forgive, whether I could forget, whether I could trust again. But the further I went, the more clearly I realized that there was no turning back. Not because I hate you, I don't, even after everything, but because we both have changed, and what was between us can no longer be returned. I rented an apartment in the city, I work, I live, everything is the same as before, but without you it's different. Sometimes I find myself missing your voice, the way you made coffee in the morning, our stupid arguments about what movie to watch. But then I remember that night, your words, the messages you deleted, and I understand that I can't live with it. I can't pretend that nothing happened, and I can't build something new on this foundation. You said that you were missing something, and maybe you were right, I felt it too. I just didn't want to admit it. I filed for divorce not out of anger, but because it is the only way out that I see. We both need to move on, even if we don't know where. I'll leave the house to you, I don't need it. There are too many memories. I'll pick up my things later when everything is settled. Sorry if it hurts. I didn't want it to end like this, but I guess we both knew it was inevitable. Take care, Kelly. You were always better than the mistake you made. Matt." Kelly finished reading the letter, and her hands fell to the table, squeezing the paper until the edges wrinkled. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but she didn't notice them. She just looked at the lines that Matt wrote and felt like something inside her was finally breaking. It was not just the end of their marriage, it was the end of an entire era, 10 years that she considered the foundation of her life. And now that foundation had crumbled, leaving her alone with this notice and his words. She expected something like this after 2 months of silence, after he left, after their last conversation. But seeing it on paper, in black and white, was like a blow. She stood up, went to the window, and looked out onto the street where she and Matt had once walked together, laughed, and made plans. Now he was out there somewhere in his new life, and she stood here, holding the end of their old one in her hands. Kelly returned to the desk, took the notice and letter, and put them in the drawer, not because she wanted to hide them, but because she didn't know what to do with them. She didn't cry anymore, the tears dried up, leaving only emptiness. Matt was right. Their marriage couldn't go back to the way it was. That night with Trevor, her confessions, his pain, all this became a wall that they could not climb over. And now, with this divorce, they both admitted that it would not be possible to move forward together. She sat back, looking at the cold coffee, and wondered what would happen next. Maybe she will find herself, as he wrote. Maybe she will learn to live without him. Or maybe this emptiness will remain with her forever. But one thing was clear: their story was over, and this letter was the last point, which Matt wrote in neat, familiar handwriting. A light rain began to fall outside the window, and Kelly closed her eyes, listening to the sound of it. For the first time in months, she didn't know what to feel: relief, bitterness, or just tiredness. But she knew that now she would have to go forward, alone, into a world where Matt was no longer around. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.